Hi everyone, welcome back to Aidans Railways. Today it's going to be a two-part video. I've had to do it in two parts because it's just incredibly long, so I'm trying to keep it down to about half an hour a piece. A while back, some of you might remember, I actually made a custom Flying Scotsman for Aidan with the face and the smoke deflectors and things like that for his Thomas Railway. It was always the plan to make a water tender, so it had the dual tenders at the rear. I've had the parts for quite some time now. It's just been a case of getting round to it because there's been so many other projects going on, and today we've made a start with it. Please be careful if you're going to attempt this, if you're using any kind of sharp implements. During this I'm having to use hacksaws, Stanley knives, craft knives, all that sort of thing. Please be really careful, and if at any point you think you need to get supervision with somebody else or help, please do so, and use eye protection if you're using anything like, multi-drills and that sort of thing. This isn't a definitive guide as to how to do it. This is me doing it. If it helps you, that's brilliant, and I really do hope it does help you. But like I said, just be very careful. Maybe watch the video instead of trying to watch it and do it at the same time. The parts I've used are relatively cheap. The tenders are quite old Hornby Railways, possibly even trying in the Maldens shells, so I picked them up for a couple of quid here and there from the model shop. There's a new part that I got from Peter's Spares. That is an actual replacement part for the Hornby water tender. I hope you enjoy. It's going to be fun doing this. And in the meantime, one of the other projects that's been going on is a custom hank. So if you want to know how to make one of them, there'll be a video coming up soon, just for Aidan. So yeah, enjoy. So we're down here on the bench, and what I've got here is just a basic spare tender. This is a much older one. This is old Hornby Railways tender. It's got these plastic wheels, like a split axle type. Now I've got two of these. Now I've had them for a very long time. I've been waiting to do this for quite a while. There's been no rush, and they've just been sat there. In fact, they've been on the shelf behind me during a number of videos that I've done. But now's the time to start this project. So effectively, we're going to have to cut and shut two ordinary tenders. There's a certain amount of modification, and there's going to be quite a lot of cutting, whether that be with, a Stanley knife, craft knife, hacksaw, razor saw, whatever works best for you, and whatever you've got available. But be careful. If it's not the knife blade that's going to cut you, it'll be the plastic. So just bear that in mind when you start this project, if you choose to do so. So remember, this is going to be an interpretation. It's going to be as close as I can get it with the items that I have. So first and foremost, there's a screw in the bottom of these ones in the center. You undo it, and then the shell will come off. There's usually a weight inside, and you're left with the chassis. For the time being, the chassis can go to one side, same as everything else. Now, on at least one, right, you need to save as much of the body as you can. You could cut it down the middle. You could cut it at one end. Whatever works for you. What I'm doing is I'm actually cutting right down the edge here, saving the corridor side and as much of the body as I possibly can. All I'm actually using is a Stanley knife. The plastic itself is really quite thin. There's not an awful lot to it, and because it's so old, it takes very little work to get it where you want it, just by you don't even have to put a lot of pressure on. You just need to run the knife down, run it down again, run it down again, and eventually it naturally will cut through. You don't get impatient and don't start applying pressure, because that's going to be the first thing that causes it to go straight through or damage it or end up cutting a finger off or something like that, and we don't want that. This coal load has got to go, no matter what. It's got to go. It protrudes over the actual area that you're going to need to work on, so that it needs to go. You need to save on at least one of the tenders this water cap. You want to try and keep that whole area there intact on at least one, because you need that for the water tender itself. Now I've got to cut this one slightly differently, because as if by magic, before I started filming, I wanted to see exactly what the best technique would be, and lo and behold, there we have one already cut. And that, you can just see there's a shaving there, that was just using the Stanley knife. That's all I used, and I just ran it down, 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 and eventually went through that side, same there, and then I just did the same inside and across the back. I did run it along on the top as well when I was getting close to going through, and then eventually it just came away. It's not that hard. I've got to do it with this one. But the difference with this one is I've tried to save as much of the body as I possibly can with this one. I only need a certain amount of the rear of this one. I don't need the whole tender. I just need a certain amount of it. And in order to ascertain exactly how much I need to keep a hold of, here's the tender, here's one of the chassis. Now if you go and put it on, it won't sit on, because if you can just have a look here, you can see there is a small aperture cut out here, which is where the bottom of this corridor locates, like so. So if you try to lie it on the other side, because it hasn't got that aperture, it won't sit in. But you can get it right to where you want it. We do need to modify the actual chassis, but not at this stage. I've worked out that I need 10 mil, you can see there, 10 mil centimetre. So I need to keep at least 10 millimeters from this edge in order to have what I need. Now it doesn't matter if I'm ever so slightly short, because I can fill it. I'm going to have to fill it anyway to get rid of the actual join marks. But it's important that I actually have what I need, bare minimum. I'm just going to use a vernier gauge. You can use a ruler, a tape, whatever you've got to hand. Not everyone has a vernier. If I just bring this back to 10 mil, there we go. Just going to lock that in place. That's going to be able to give me my marker for where I need to be cutting. So what I've done there, I've just measured from the very edge along 10 millimeters, and then I've just say, and I don't know if you can be able to pick it out, I've just say put a notch in the plastic to show me exactly where I need to be cutting. Now these particular tenders that I've got a hold of, they actually have a rib line all the way along there, which will stop any rule, and this is nice and square. So I'm going to use this to help me just get it in place to run the first score line, and then if I just run that down a couple of times, then I've got a score line. You can see that very clearly there, right? And then I'm just going to do the same on the opposite side. And have a score line. all I need to do now is rest the blade inside that score line and then just repeatedly run it down. Now initially it's not going to have a channel for it to sit in, but it will come eventually. It will get used to being in that channel and you can just run the blade slowly down. There we go. Now remember, don't worry too much because anything on this side at the moment you don't need. It's this bit here we're trying to save. And then that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to run the score line all the time. So I'll come back once I've done both sides and then we'll get to how we're going to cut the top. Okay, so after repeatedly cutting up and down, I've got the line. I did actually snap this side, but I'm not worried because this is actually far more brittle plastic, so bear that in mind when you do this. The other one wasn't, so it could be its age, but I've saved the part that I need. And the whole thing's getting painted anyway, and it's going to have to be butchered together and filled, so as long as I've got that bit, I'm okay. So that is now separated at both sides, and it was just lightly scoring along, slowly taking my time. That was actually pressure off my hand holding it in place that did that, but I'm not worried at all. Now what I need to do is I need to cut across. The first thing I'm going to have to do is mark on the tender sides at the top exactly where that is, and you can just see I've just put a notch in both sides. And there's no easy way of saying this, but it's going to be the same process. Now, if you've got a multi-tool with the cutting blade on it, then by all means do that. Use it. Just bear in mind, if it's brittle plastic like this particular one, make sure you're wearing eye protection because you'll have bits flying off all over the place. Also, remember that when you use a cutting tool, the disc itself is going to generate quite a lot of heat and it might damage the side that you want to keep. So just bear that in mind. It's certainly, if I had one handy, I would probably be giving it a go. But this is just how I'm doing it. This is just how I'm doing it at the moment with what I have available to try and get this project out of the way, because I've got some much bigger projects coming up. So pretty much in the same way, I'm just going to use the ruler there across the notches. I'm just going to score a line across the top where I need to get it cut, and I'm just going to do the same thing. However, I won't need to get quite as deep because when I do, I'll be able to bend it over and I'm not worried because we're going to be filing and things like that. So I'm just going to move on to doing the same. So there we go. Cut and then pulled and it snapped off. There's a little bit here I'm not too worried about. I'm going to file it, cut it off, but that is the general gist. That is what I need for it to come together and to effectively give me two corridors at either side. But I'm going to clean that bit up now. I'm just going to cut that off. None of this matters too much, so I'll clean that off. We'll come back and then we'll sort of file and have a test fit. So I'm just test fitting by hand there, and I'm reasonably happy at the size. I think that's going to work. I can't see any big problems. As you can see, chunks missing here, but that's not too, I'm not worried about that. This whole thing's got to be bonded together anyway. So what I need to look at now is seeing if I can fix these two pieces of shell back together, and then and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bond these two pieces of shell together. I'm going to brace them up inside, and then we're going to have to look at other things like how I'm going to support the new roof to this actual water tender. We need to modify the chassis, and I've got a few extras that have got to be fitted as well for the buffer beam and so on. So first of all, I'm going to work on getting this tender back as one piece anyway. Okay, so I have my two sections now. I've filed down these edges, took off some of the roughness and things like that. I've getting them to a size that I'm happy with. I'm not bothered about a small gap and things like that because this has all got to be filled and so on. What I now need to do is actually bond the two together. I'm trying to make this as uncomplicated as humanly possible, even just for myself. What I've got here is some 1mm plastic card, and what I'm basically doing is I've cut two. They're not the full depth of the tender, because if I do that, this ridge here on the edge of the chassis will then stop the tender from fitting on. So I've made it shorter so that I've got a gap there for that ridge to help still locate the body onto the actual chassis. But I've also left a gap here because there's some work that's got to be done on the top end for fitting the new roof. So realistically, I'm just going to use some poly cement and liquid poly like this. Now you could use super glue, I suppose, but one of the reasons I'm not is because I actually believe that this is more of a plasticky tender, and I have a distinct feeling because of how brittle this one is that it might be more of the polystyrene style, in which case the super glue will probably cause significant damage if I'm correct. So rather than take the risk and then lose the whole project altogether, I'm just going to use some liquid poly, and I'm going to put these bracings into position, and then I'm going to fit both ends together. So what's happened now is they're bonded together. I've actually placed in the broken piece and fixed that, and I've moved on to the next stage, which is, as you can see, there's quite a lot of plastic card in there, and what I've been using is some of this plastic card L. I've also been using some of this rod, and it's all just plastic card. It's I think this rod here is, if you can see that on the screen, item number 212. So is it a rod 2mm? So, and the angle line, there you go. So they're left over from other jobs that I've got, and I've found that using the rod along the edge, leaving a lip, because you need to leave a lip for the actual I'm going to use this here for that card to fit into, to get you a nice flush finish. And I've done that along both sides. Just use poly cement, bonds straight away, and then I've used some of the angle just to make some supports for holding the roof. Now obviously you need it to bend, and naturally it's not going to want to do that. It's going to want to spring open all the time. So I've literally, you can just see in there, there's no right and wrong way to do this. It's just cut little bits, stick them in place, get them where you think they're going to work, and try it that way. That's all I can suggest. The video would have took about 2-3 hours if I'd done it while I was actually cutting this and bonding this into places, but I was just doing it one piece at a time. Remember to leave this area here where your water filler is accessible, because when we do put the roof on, we're going to have to actually cut out a square there for them to get access to it. Now what I have here is some 0.5 black plastic card, so it's 0.5 thickness, so it bends relatively easy. It was about 80p for a sheet, it was nothing really, and I've cut a section that will actually fit into the roof area. Obviously it's a little curved at the minute because I've been bending it and trying to get it to sit where I want it, but it's not going to do that naturally. But before I actually do that, I need to make sure I've cut the hole in here for this water. So if I go halfway along, it's a little over 3 centimeters, it's about 32 mil. I want to cut a square in the centre, and then the centre, the hole in the centre wants to be roughly, I don't know, about 12 meters by 12 millimeters by 12 millimeters. So the centre point for it in is, weirdly enough, is about 12 millimeters. So if I make myself a mark, I'm 12 millimeters in, just make a little dot. I know that the centre is going to be there. So all I need to do now is cut a square out, and remember it's plastic card, so you don't need any real force to do this with. I just need to cut out a square so that I know that I've got the filling hole there for this tender. So there you can see I've cut my square hole so that hopefully when I've managed to bend it, it will actually have that hole there. Obviously I'm not going to bond it until I've painted these areas black, because we don't want that showing up. But now that that's done, I need to get this to bend and stay relatively bent for when I actually bond it. So I've actually got a battery here. This is actually off a vaping item. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave this for some time with an elastic band in a few locations along it, just to help it get used to being on a curved surface. It's not going to have to be precise, it's just purely to get it to be used to being bent and curved. So I'm going to leave that for a little while. I might even apply a little bit of the hairdryer to it just to help hold it in position, but I'm going to leave that now overnight, to be honest. That's far too great of a curve for the roof of this tender, but it's going to naturally want to bend back out again afterwards. So for the time being, it's absolutely ideal, because a little bit over is better than not. So I'm going to leave all that to dry, and we'll get that area there painted, and then we'll get that bonded on. Then we'll move on to filling and sanding and all that kind of stuff, and then adding some ribbing to the top, before I then have to start thinking about playing with this chassis. And I've got a actual buffer bar that is with the coupler that's actually meant for the dual tender, that I managed to pick up a while ago from Peter's Spares, so we'll be getting that out, and then we'll be modifying the chassis as well. So I've had that left overnight. You can see everything else is dried. I've painted black on the edges there. It's now time to glue this. I'm not particularly looking forward to it. I'm going to have to do it in stages, one end first and then bring it over slowly and do it. It has got a curve in it, and everything seems to fit when I put it up and put it in against. So I'm just hoping we'll have plenty of luck there. So yeah, we'll get on with that, and I'll show you a little time lapse of me doing it. Okay, so it's the morning after now, and you can see it has stuck. It's not brilliant. I'm not going to profess to it being brilliant. You can see there is a slight dip there in the actual roof line, but it is actually curved, and it does run all the way along. And by the time I put some banding on, things like that, it's going to take away from that anyway. But plus there's quite a bit of filler needs to be used. It was obviously down here and along the edges and around the sides, and obviously around here as well. But I've just test fitted it onto one of the two chassis, and you can see it does slip straight on. I'm going to put some filler in here. I'm going to do that, and then that can go and set, and that's going to take a while for it to set properly. But moving to the chassis, so here's the other chassis, and it would appear that somebody prior to me owning it, when they've had the original coal tender on, they've actually put a bar across the front here as a makeshift coupling. But that's no good to me. I wanted to have it look reasonably okay anyway. But as you can see on both of them, couplings there. I've got the other coupling here for this one. What I need to do is I need to cut out this section here, removing the old drawbar, because what I need to fit in is this. Now this is from Peter's Spares. This is an actual spare part for the Hornby water tender. This is the second coupling. It's got the buffer bar with buffers and the decoupling there, and that will effectively need to be in place here, like so. So it needs to be in there. It's upside down there, but you get the general gist. So that area there needs to be cut out. So that's my next job. For that, I'm actually going to use a hacksaw. I'm just going to cut down, and then I'm going to score along with a knife, just so that it'll snap off quite easily, and then I'll file it down. If you've got a mini drill, that's even better. You can be able to slice and cut it out. But that's the next stage. I need to do that. And then remember, you've got the slots here, and they do locate on one side of your chassis. So you're going to need to cut a couple of slots in here. I'm just going to use a square file to do that, so that the actual tender will still locate in, and then that needs to be bonded in place. So that's the next job. So there you go. Not a lie, all I did was I cut down both sides with the hacksaw, just a little junior one, scored along the back line, and then as soon as I'd scored a few times, I just pushed and it came straight out. So I'm just going to quickly file that area smooth in preparation for fitting the buffer beam. Now what I have done in preparation is I actually have got two of these, just in case anything went wrong. You should be able to make out that I have actually filed out the area where the corridor needs to locate on the tender body. You can just see there, so it'll actually sit in there quite nicely. And as you can see, I've put some filler in a number of places, not everywhere it needs to be, but just in a number of places. It's going to require sanding down. It needs to dry. I need to sand it down, and then I'm going to have to go back over areas just to try and get it as smooth as I possibly can. So in the meantime, I'm going to file down this end of the chassis, and then I'm going to fit this into place. So you can see that's just test fit into place. It's not glued or anything at the moment, but you can see there it is. It does fit. It's where it's meant to be. It needs to be glued. It needs to be painted up and things like that, but we're not quite at that stage yet. One of the things I'm going to point out is in the process of removing the coal, you lose the ability to screw the shell to the chassis. So this, when it's done, it will be glued permanently to the chassis. So it's important that I get as much as I can right first time. Yes, so it's quite important that I get as much of it right as I can first time. I mean, it's not going to be perfect. It's certainly not going to be the Hornby model, but this is a means to an end, building a water tender for Aidan's Flying Scotsman, the custom one, just to go with it. So what I need to do is let this filler dry. It's getting there, but it's not quite there, and patience, you need to have patience with this. You need to let it dry so that it can sand off properly, and it does just sit on there. It's quite nice doing that. I think I'm going to glue this into position now, and then it's just ready for having the body applied to it. It also means that I can now super glue this weight into position as well, because obviously the only thing that was holding that down was the original coal shell. So that needs fixing down. I can do that. I can glue this into place now. I might even paint up the buffer bar prior to actually fitting it, and then it'll just save me a job when it's actually fitted. And then hopefully the fillet will be dry on the body and I can start sanding there. So that's the end of part one. In the next video we'll be looking at a few modifications. We're painting, transfers, getting fitted and things like that. And so join me when that video comes up and goes live. But for the time being, if you're going to start this project, I hope this has been of some help.